Do you have an ESP32 and you're trying to figure out how to write code for the Bluetooth low energy stuff? Maybe you're scratching your head a little bit when you look at the examples that come in the Arduino IDE and you're like, man, I'm just not sure what's going on here. Well, if that's you, what we're going to do in this video, what I'm going to try to do as best as I can, is we are going to go line by line and write code, and we're going to start by making a BLE server. We're going to talk about every single line of code. I'm going to try to make it as simple and straightforward as possible. So if that's what you're up for, stay along for the ride. Now, I need to be clear what this video is not going to be about. I'm not going to be talking like generally about general stuff about BLE, right? I'm not going to tell you about, the frequency it operates at and like what it's best used for and all that. None of that stuff. We're just going to talk about the code. I want you to like practically be able to write code for a BLE server. Now we will be talking about the GAT because you can't get away from that if you're working with BLE, but that'll actually be more informative than anything. All right, let's go for this. All right, so here I am in the Arduino IDE, and I just want to highlight something. All right, so I'm using an ESP32 dev module, like El Cheapo ESP32 from China. You know what I mean? Some dev board. I think it's like the Vroom. Okay, I'll leave a link in the description if you want to, get the same one. So I've got that board selected in the Arduino IDE. And when I come up to File and I go down to Examples, you can see that some examples come installed for this board. And there's two sets of examples. There's BLE and then there's Bluetooth serial. So what's really important to understand is that Bluetooth comes in two different flavors. You've got Bluetooth Classic, which is kind of what a lot of people think Bluetooth is, which honestly, I kind of thought Bluetooth was kind of like the big deal, which is, when you connect your phone to like some wireless speaker or something like that and you're streaming audio, like that kind of thing, right? So Bluetooth Classic is what we are not going to be talking about in this tutorial. What we're going to be talking about is something way more fun. It's called Bluetooth Low Energy, BLE. Bluetooth Low Energy is way cooler. It's for just sharing small amounts of information between different devices. So for example, I've got an electric toothbrush and it's got this little clock that comes with it. And when I start the toothbrush, it does this countdown on the clock, like they're talking to each other via BLE. Now, okay, brushing your teeth, you couldn't get more boring than that, but still, you can do all types of interesting stuff. You'll notice that the library comes with a lot of BLE example code, and I highly recommend you check these out. We're going to be working on building a server, but we're not going to use their examples. We're just going to write from scratch. Okay, so before we dive into the code, though, we need to talk about the GAT. It's the generic attribution profile. And I just think of like Gatling gun because when I try to wrap my head around it, I feel like somebody just shot me with a Gatling gun. So what is this whole deal exactly? Like what's going on? Well, this is just a way for us to think about the different layers of the BLE protocol. So notice that these are all nested, all right? And I want you to think of the top level as the server. And you can kind of think as the server as like a widget, like an actual device. Like, for example, my toothbrush, right? So we could say, hey, the toothbrush is a device, right? But that device is running a server. We can also call that a peripheral, all right? So we've got our toothbrush. Now, the toothbrush, it can have one or more services associated with it. So maybe one of the services it has is like user data, and maybe it has another service that talks about like power consumption or something like that. And each service has this thing called a UUID associated with it, which is a universally unique ID. I kind of like that acronym. I think it's a little silly, but whatever. Now each service can have multiple characteristics associated with it. And the characteristic is the actual value, right? So let's say that this was the user data service for my toothbrush. And let's say that the characteristic here is like time running, something like that. And so the value would be, I don't know, how many seconds it's been running since it, last started. Notice that the characteristic also has a UUID. And since service and characteristic weren't enough, we can also have descriptors, and a descriptor is assigned to a characteristic. So a characteristic can actually have one or more descriptors. Doesn't have to have any, but it can have a bunch. And what the descriptors do is they add metadata to the characteristic. For example, maybe it'd be like time in milliseconds, right? This would be like, oh, hey, that value is meant to be milliseconds, something like that. Or if it was a temperature, Fahrenheit or Celsius, that kind of thing. Notice that the descriptor also has a UUID. Okay, again, so this is the generic attribute profile, and every piece we code, you're going to see these words: server, service, characteristic, description, descriptor. I just want you to get this stuck in your brain. Okay, now before, just real quick, I said that, right, here's a server. It could have multiple services, see, like that. And notice that this service right here has two characteristics. This characteristic doesn't have any descriptors. This one has two descriptors. You kind of get the idea, right? So we can get all crazy here. But this is a slide I really want to show you because there's just a lot of complexity that we're going to get into, right? And I'm not going to be able to talk about all of this stuff in this video. Maybe in upcoming videos we will. Now here's the deal. BLE has a lot going on. In fact, part of the reason it's so cool is because there is a lot going on, but it just takes a while to like start figuring out what all this stuff is. All right. So this diagram here, I don't want you to like it's like makes me want to barf my brain out when I look at this a little bit, but this doesn't even get into all the details by any stretch, but it just kind of diagrams out a little of the stuff that you can do. All right. So basically at the heart of this ESP32 BLE library is we have this thing called a device, and you can tell your device, hey, let's be a server, or you can be like, no, you know what, let's be a client. And then a device can do things. It can also do a scan looking for other BLE stuff, right? But let's say you're a server, because that's what we're going to be working on today. We're going to write our own server. Now the server can do a couple things. Notice it can advertise, and it can also notify. Now we're not going to be talking about notify today. Maybe we'll talk about it at some point, but we're just going to be talking about the advertising today. You'll also notice that a client can connect to a server. And again, the idea is like an information exchange, right? So a client can write to a server, client can read from a server, like we can exchange information. Now, the way the ESP32 library works is all of this stuff is basically encapsulated in different classes. So let's check this out. Now, this is just like that previous slide. I just took some of the stuff out to make it hopefully a little more readable. But basically, you can see the idea of a server is encapsulated in the BLE server class. And then we've got a BLE service class, a BLE characteristic class, we've got a BLE scan class. Let's just say there's a lot of classes in this ESP32 BLE library. All right, well, that was enough of stuff that's not writing code. Let's go ahead and get into the code writing. First thing I'm going to do is write out a to-do list, and then we'll talk about it. So let me do that.
If you do design your own circuit boards, I want to take a minute and tell you about today's sponsor, JLCPCB.com. JLC, making juicy little circuits. Every time I order boards delivered so perfect, I upload my Gerbers to their online servers. Choose my build parameters, like quantity and surface finish. Things look good on their 3D viewer. JLC making juicy little circuits. Order today at JLCPCB.com. JLCPCB.com also offers PCB assembly, 3D printing, laser cutting, CNC machining, and so much more. Check out JLCPCB.com today for all your DIY electronics, engineering, and maker needs.
Oh man, this is a lot of stuff, isn't it? I'm telling you, this Bluetooth low energy stuff, it's super cool, but there's kind of a lot to go over. So I'll try to keep this quick. All right. Well, first thing we're going to do is we are going to create a BLE device. All right. So we'll do some things associated with that. Then what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey device, we want you to be a server. So we're going to make ourselves a server. So let's look back at our GAT example. Remember, we've got a server, and then or rather we've got a device, and a device can be a server. Well, we're going to say, hey, be a server. Okay, then what we're going to do is we are going to make some server callbacks. And this part right here is probably the most confusing part of this whole ordeal, because the callback syntax is it just looks a little weird if you're not used to seeing it, but once you wrap your head around it, I think you'll be on your road. This library uses lots of callbacks using the same syntax. I'm going to show you how to do that. Hopefully we can figure that out. All right, then what we're going to do is create a service, and we're going to attach it to that server. We're going to create a characteristic, we're going to attach it to the service, and then we're going to make some callbacks for our characteristic. We're also going to be taking a descriptor. We'll make a descriptor and add that to our characteristic. All the while, we are going to do some advertising. We're going to advertise the service. Now, I'm probably going to keep all this in the same order here. We might jump out of order a little bit, but just again, looking at this Gantt chart, right? We're going to make our server. We're going to assign a service to it. We're going to assign a characteristic to that service, and then we're going to assign a descriptor to that characteristic. And then at some point, our server is going to be advertising its information so that we can pick it up. Okay. So let's go ahead. What I'm going to do is first I am going to write some code for this BLE device. Let me do that, and then we'll talk about it. All right, so what I did is include the BLE device.h header file. So I'm just including this BLE library. Now what's cool about this library is it comes pre-installed with your Arduino IDE when you add the ESP32 Arduino core. So I won't talk about that. Maybe in the description I'll link to, if you haven't installed the core. You probably have already done that by now if you're working with ESP32 BLE. But anyway, this comes pre-installed. So I included this library. The next thing I do is I define a device name. So I'm just giving it something silly, like CIA monitoring device. This is what I want to show up when I scan for this device. Now we're going to be using a phone application called Light Blue. It's available in iOS and in Android. I stinking love this app for kind of like troubleshooting your BLE, kind of getting stuff set up with the ESP32. I think it's super user friendly. It's free to download and use, so that's what we'll be using. But when I open that up, I want to be able to see CIA monitoring device as one of the listed BLE items. All right, so that's the device name. Now, I just called this device name. Like, this is just to define. I don't have to call it device name. I could have called it device signature or device ID, whatever. Like, we're just making that up, right? So I just made that up and I made this up. Okay. Then down in the setup function, I start serial communication. I like to just put a little print in for, troubleshooting as I'm going along, just to make sure, hey, setup is actually starting. And then I do this thing right here, which looks kind of weird. All right, what's going on here? So we're saying BLE device. This is a reference to the BLE device library, which we just included. But then we've got : init, and then we're passing in device name. All right, so maybe you've worked with libraries in the past with Arduino, right? And you might be used to something like this, where you've got like serial.begin, right? Why isn't this BLE device.init? Well, what's going on here? And I won't go too in depth on this, but the init function is a static function part of this BLE device class. Okay, so the BLE device is a class in like C++. Init is a static function. So what's going on here is that the creators of this library only wanted you to have one instance of this BLE device actually made. So with like the servo library, you could say like servo number 1 and servo number 2 and servo number 3. You could make a bunch of instances of the servo class, right? You can make a bunch of different servo objects. That is not the case for the BLE device library. You can't, in one program, make a bunch of different devices. There's only one device, and this init function starts the entire BLE stack that your server is going to depend on, the advertisements are going to depend on. Everything kind of starts with this init, but you only do it once, and kind of that's why that's funky looking. Hopefully that makes a little sense. Yeah, a little bit of hand waving there, but That's what's going on. You're going to see this colon syntax quite a bit because this library uses a lot of static functions. Okay, so we did that. Let's go see what we can check off of our to-do list. All right, so we imported the BLE device library. Check. Gave it a device name. Awesome. Initialized it. All right, hey, we are moving it along. We have created a BLE device. Man, I'm feeling good. All right, the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and create a server. So let me write some code and then we'll talk about it. Okay, so what have we done now? So here, we're down here in the setup. We, started serial communication. We initialized the device, and now we're creating the server. Now, oh man, you might be like, Mama, what is this? All right, yeah, okay. So let's talk about this. If you are not comfortable with C pointers, then you're going to be a little uncomfortable during this presentation because we're going to use lots of pointers. Now, I won't try to, tell you right now in the next couple minutes what pointers are. But if you do want to learn in depth what pointers are, check out our training program. We've got a whole course that dives in how to understand pointers. They're really not as confusing as you might think, but they're just really a big part of C that they're pretty helpful. Anyway, a pointer is simply a variable that holds the address of another variable. It's literally all it is, all right? The address in memory, right? And so what's going on here, all right, is we're making a variable. It's a pointer, okay? And we're just giving it a name, P server. We could call this anything we wanted. By convention, when you make a pointer, a lot of folks stick a P in front of it so people know, hey, it's a pointer. I like this convention. That's, why I'm following it here. Okay, so we could have named this anything. We're calling it P server. All right, it is a pointer. It is going to hold the address of another variable. Well, what is this other variable it's going to hold? Well, it is going to hold a server. So it's going to hold basically the address of a server, and that server is getting created by this BLE device that we initialized back here. So we've got BLE device, and notice we've got our colon syntax again. So this is a static function that's part of this BLE device library. All right. You can kind of think of it as like, I don't know, almost like the setup of the class a little bit, right? I don't know how to say it, right? But anyway, it's a function that we're able to call, a static function we're able to call, and it's going to return us a server object, all right? And that is going to return us an address, a reference to it, right? And that's what's getting saved in P server in this variable right here. And the type, this type here is just a BLE server. So this is a type in the library, okay? And this BLE server right here is just the name of the class that this is a reference to, all right? So what type of pointer is this for? Well, hey, it's for a BLE server type of pointer, right? I don't know if I'm saying that quite right, but this would, like, let's say we were making an integer, right? Let's say we were making a pointer to an integer. Well, it would be an integer pointer. Well, this is a BLE server pointer. It's just BLE server happens to be a class that we're pointing to. Okay, hopefully that made a little bit of sense. But what do we have now? Well, what we have now is we have this thing called P server that is our server. So this P server is what we'll be adding our services to. And when we add services, then we'll add characteristics to our characteristic. Okay, so hopefully that makes a little sense. Let's go ahead and go up here, see what we can check off here. Okay, so I created the BLE server, but I want to tell you a little trick here. Notice I did not import the BLE server library. Why didn't I do that? I mean, we're using BLE server. Wouldn't I need to import the library? Well, check this out. In a lot of the examples, they do include, they include like BLE device, BLE server, BLE this and that. But if you go into the BLE device library, you just go to the definition here. So here's the code that's in BLEdevice.h, all right? They already include BLE server, BLE client, BLE U2s, BLE scan, BLE. They already include all these. So why? I'm not going to double include it. It's already got it. Like, it's just more lines of code to write. So we didn't even have to do that. Man, that makes me feel good when I can skip something. All right, so we've created our BLE device. We've created the server. Now what we're going to do is create some server callbacks. All right, if you thought what we did so far was weird, wait for this. All right, let's do this. We'll write some code and then talk about it. So I wrote a little bit of code. We're going to talk about this. All right, let me just do a quick review what we've done before we talk about the new code. We had our includes, right? We included the BLE device library. We gave our device a name that we came up with called CA monitoring device. We started some serial communication. We initialized the device using that static function in the BLE device library, right? We fed in the name. And then we made our server, right? So we created a server. And now what we're doing is we are creating callback functions for our server. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look. So here's setup down here. This callback function is above setup. In fact, it's not a function. It's not just a function. It's a class. Now that's weird. So let's first talk about, well, what the heck is a callback? All right. Well, a callback, generally speaking, is a function that is going to get executed when something else in your code happens, right? In this case, the server has two callback functions. One is onConnect and one is onDisconnect. So basically what this means is anytime a client connects to our server, this function right here, onConnect, it's going to get executed. It's going to get called back, right? Same thing here for this disconnect. If a client disconnects from our server, this function is going to get called. And by setting these callback functions up, like we set them up ahead of time, right? We don't have to like write in the code. We don't have to say somewhere in the code like, hey, when the server disconnects, do this. Like we don't have to manage that. The BLE stack takes care of that. And when I say BLE stack, what I'm basically saying is this BLE library is going to handle all this stuff for us, right? So when a client connects behind the scenes, it's going to call this function for us. When a client disconnects behind the scenes, it's going to call this disconnect function. Okay, so what's the deal with this? Like, why are we writing a class? Why do we, and these functions in here? What's the deal here? Okay, well, let me try to explain this as best I can. Basically, this BLE server callbacks, this is a virtual function in C++, all right? And it's meant to be overwritten. Okay, so what we're doing is we're making a class that is a subclass of this BLE server callbacks, all right? And so that's what this whole thing right here, this colon right here means, all right? So we're writing a class, it's called my server callbacks. It is a subclass of BLE server callbacks, all right? Let me go, if I can go ahead and take a look at the code here. There we go. Okay, so check this out. Now, I know there's like a lot going on here, but basically, notice all it's got here is void onConnect and then some parameters with it, right? So like a function signature, and then it's got void onDisconnect, another function signature. So what we have to do is they kind of provide us, I'll call them the handles, right? They provide us the function signatures we need to use inside our subclass. So we have to use onConnect, like this literal exact verbiage with these parameters, right? A BLE server, a pointer to a BLE server. And we have to use the function onDisconnect, again, with the same parameters here. But on the inside of this function, we can write whatever gibberish we want. So I don't know if that made any sense to you or not. I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain, but basically we are subclassing this BLE server callbacks. And this isn't anything like special I'm coming up with, right? This is all in the example code with this library. Like this was the, this is the idea, is that you subclass these callback classes and then, overwrite the functions in there, and then you can give the functionality you want. So this little paradigm right here, this, syntax that we see right here, you're going to see this over and over again in this library because almost every object has some callbacks associated with it. So what I'm talking about here is remember our setup right here? So we're going to have server callbacks, we have service callbacks, we have characteristic callbacks, we've got, like client callbacks, I think there's scan callbacks, there's callbacks for everything. And so basically the only thing that changes is that like the name of the callback will change, right? And then the functions on the inside, like the handles you call them by, the signature is going to change. It might be like on result or something like that. And, we'll be talking about some of those in this lesson and upcoming lessons. Anyway, okay, then just to be clear, see this word right here? This is under our control. We're allowed to give this class whatever name we want it. Now, in the examples, they use my server callbacks, right? Now, I actually can't stand the name My Server Callbacks. It reminds me of like My Documents. Like, come on, give me a break. But I could not think of a better name. When you put the My in front of it, now you know, like, you don't confuse like server callbacks with BLE server callbacks. So anyway, I'm sticking with this My Server Callbacks. You could call it like whatever you wanted. Like I said, I couldn't come up with a better name, so I'm sticking with this My Server Callbacks. All right. Okay, so what are we actually doing? So here's what I want to have happen. On the ESP32 that I'm using, there is an LED on digital pin 2. So when a client connects, I want to turn that pin on, and then I'm just going to print something to the serial monitor. And if a client disconnects, I'm going to turn that pin off, and say the client disconnected. Okay, so that's how you make this callback. All right, now I talked about this at length because when we do other callbacks, I'm not going to talk about them as much. So if you're still wondering about this whole thing, just kind of come back to this part here. So now that we've created our callbacks, now what we need to do is actually assign them to the server. We have to set those callbacks. All right, and we've got some more, kind of weird syntax if you're not used to pointers. All right, so if you recall, pserver is a pointer for our server object. All right, now our server object has some functions associated with it, and normally, right, when you're using functions that are part of an object, you'd use this like, dot operator, right? So serial dot begin, right? We're accessing this begin function from the serial library, so I use this dot. Well, when you have an object that's a pointer, you can't use that dot operator. You actually need to use this little arrow, right? So it's the same thing, like there's a set callbacks function that this pserver has, but since it's a pointer, we can't use the dot operator. We have to use this little arrow syntax. So we're saying, hey, we want to use this function from this pserver class, set callbacks, and now what we do is we pass in our My Server Callbacks function. Right, so this was the name that we gave our callbacks class up again. Remember My Server Callbacks? And then you've got the new keyword in front of it. I know, looks a little crazy, but again, this line of code is going to repeat itself, several times as you work with this BLE library. The only thing that changes is whether it's callbacks for, a server or characteristic, whatever. Now I added one additional thing here is I went ahead and started advertising. Notice that this is another static function from the BLE device library, right? And the reason I wanted to start advertising is once we do this, now when something scans for BLE devices like this phone app, this light blue phone app we'll be using, it will be able to show up some information. And the only information that we've really got available right now that we've specified is our device name, which is what we specified when we initialized our BLE device. So what I want to do is go ahead, let's take a look at the phone app, and we'll take a look at the ESP32 and see how this is working. All right, so here's my phone app. This feels really personal, showing you my phone and all. Anyway, okay, so here's this light blue app. Again, this is the app I recommend doing. I mean, there's all types of apps that do this. I really like this light blue one, though, I got to say. Okay, so I'm going to open this up. And what it's going to do is it's just going to scan for BLE devices in the neighborhood, all right? So we can see we've got, my printer, some unnamed device, some random mesh device, Michael's iMac. Okay, hey, bam, there we go. Now look at this, CIA monitoring device down here. Okay, see at the very bottom? Hey, that's pretty interesting. I'm just going to hit this arrow. What do we see here? Okay, so, it gives a local name. It says CIA monitoring device. It tells me a transmit value. There's really not much I'm learning from this, though. I'm going to go ahead and click connect. Okay, so now I've connected to this device, and you'll notice that the LED on my ESP32 turned on. Like, that's pretty sweet, right? Because that was that My Server Callback class, right? Like the callback on connect got called, that LED turned on. Now, again, we don't really have any advertisement data in here, right? We haven't specified anything yet. This is all part of what we'll be doing when we start adding services and that kind of stuff. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click these three buttons up here at the top, and I'm going to disconnect. Now, when I disconnect, notice that LED turned off, but I want to show you something that you wouldn't have thought of. All right, so now I'm going to refresh my screen, right? So we connected and we unconnected. Now I want you to notice that, wait a second, where is my device? Like, it's not showing up anymore. Hey, what gives? Like, is my ESP32 broken? What's going on? Well, here's the deal. What happens when your device gets connected to and then disconnected is that the advertising that we started, it automatically stops. So as soon as a client connects, actually, is when the advertising stops. So if we want to continue to advertise to other devices out there, or to advertise again after, one of the devices disconnects, we need to start the advertising again. So what I'm going to do, though, just to show you, I'm going to go ahead and reset. What I did is I just reset my ESP32, and now see how we see it down here at the bottom again. And I'll just go through this one more time. I'm going to connect. I'm going to go up here. I'm going to disconnect. And then when we come back here, we'll see that it disappears. I'm doing like another scan. See, it's not here. And even if I scroll down, I promise you it's not. It doesn't show up. So let's go ahead and go back to the code and see if we can fix this in our server callbacks. It's actually a feature, right, to have it stop advertising it. Check out the description for hardware and training we recommend you use for this ESP32 BLE library. Now, if you want to watch the next video in the series, check out this video right here. Or if you want to see the full Monty, all of these BLE videos stitched together into one mega one, you can check it out right here. Either here or here. Either here or here.